Welcome to the Powerless Leader Podcast, podcast for everyday influencer lead from the middle. I'm George Engel, leadership coach, educator, and founder of Lead. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or undervalued in your workplace or team, this is for you. Each episode, we dive into real stories, practical tools, and timeless principles to help you grow your influence, even when you have no formal authority. Because leadership isn't about titles, it's about impact. So whether you're a young professional, a seasoned team member, or someone just trying to lead where you are, lean in. Your voice matters. Your leadership counts. This is the Powerless Leader Podcast. Let's rise together. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to episode 7 of the Powerless Leader Podcast. I am here to add value to you. For those of you who are seeking to gain influence in your place of work, maybe you feel invisible, maybe you want to learn how to lead from where you are without gaining position. This podcast is for you today. And today, we're going to dig into a powerful leadership tool. And the ideas from the Harvard Business Review back actually from 2 decades ago in 1998. Or is that 3 decades ago? Well, yeah, we're going into the past today. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence. What's commonly a lot of people are talking about is your EQ. That EQ, not your IQ, but your EQ. And how that impacts you as a leader. So if you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever felt underestimated, this episode is going to be for you. Well, in 1998, in the late 90s, leadership models, if you took a deep dive into those leadership models, were all about performance, about pedigree, about problem-solving IQ. But then a guy named Daniel Goleman dropped a bombshell article in the Harvard Business Review. It's a famous article called What Makes a Leader? And this is in 1998. He drops this article. He argued that it wasn't technical skills or IQ that makes you a leader, but it was their emotional intelligence, their EQ, that makes the leader. Now, some of you might be having the same reaction I had back when I first started hearing about EQ and like going, yeah, just here we go, another leadership fad. You know, I can remember sitting at work in professional development meetings and they're starting to bring this idea up and I'm just going, yeah, let me just find something else to do right now, and kind of ignored it and just tuned it out. But then I began to see gaps in some of the way I led things. I began to see problems in my own leadership and the way I just not in my skills, because I have great skills in what I do. I'm very good at what I do. But number one, how I reacted under pressure, how I reacted to change, how I handled feedback, and even how I read a room that I was involved in. And I began to realize that real leadership begins with mastering yourself. Remember, that's really what my focus has been on these podcasts, the last 7 podcasts, has been on mastering yourself, because you can't lead others until you lead yourself. And that really meant I needed to learn to manage how I reacted to things. In other words, I need to manage how to lead my emotions, not just my tasks. So what is this EQ stuff? What are we talking about here when we're talking EQ? Well, Goleman, when he wrote the article, outlined 5 competencies that every emotionally intelligent leader must have. And I want to walk you through those 5. And as I do, I want you to think about where you are and where you stand with each one of these. Okay, where you are and where you stand. The first one is self-awareness. So now we talked about self-awareness. I spent a whole episode talking about self-awareness versus self-conscious, being self-conscious. And so if you haven't listened to that one, I encourage you to go back to listen to that one. And I'll include a link to that one in the show notes. All right. But being self-aware is knowing your emotions and knowing how they impact others. The question is, have you ever, just food for thought here, have you ever walked into a room and felt the energy shift because of your mood? Or have you been in a room, or you've been working with people and somebody walks in with that negative attitude and the entire room seems to go negative? I've been in those situations before. So self-awareness is key. And again, I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode that I did on self-awareness a couple episodes ago. The second one is self-regulation, managing impulses and being able to stay calm under pressure. I've struggled with this all my life, especially if it's something that really hits me in the core. Something that just really goes against the grain of my core beliefs. If that goes against the grain of my core beliefs, you betcha I'm going to want to stand up and say something. And if I'm really being self-aware, if I'm really using self-regulation, I need to understand there are times to speak up and times to remain silent. We need to be calm in those situations and choose the right timing to present our case. Because sometimes when we speak out right away, our point may get lost in the midst of it all. Or people might just say, oh, I'm not going to listen to that. He's being too intense right now. He's stepping into my emotional space right now. People may not react well, but if you self-regulate and if you speak at the appropriate time with wisdom and not in an emotional, overreactive way, your voice is more than likely. Now, motivation. So we talked about self-awareness. We've talked about self-regulation. Motivation is another key to our emotional intelligence. We need to work on our motivation. What motivates us? What gives us the passion for the work beyond our income and our recognition we might be getting? What drives you to do the job you're doing? And this is where passion separates real leaders in our motivation. If we have the motivation, if we have the passion, real leaders will work through it. Real leaders will step up. And I'm talking about leaders without job titles, leaders without power. This is where the real leaders will start showing themselves. This is where the leader will continue to push through even in the difficult moments. It's about grit. It's about pushing forward, even under pressure, even when everything around you says you need to stop. You push through because it's your passion and you have the motivation to continue. We need that in our lives. If it is our goal, if it's our dream, if it's our passion, we need to continue to build that motivation and momentum to continue going. And the passion helps us drive that. So the self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, but we also have empathy. Oh no, empathy. I struggle with empathy sometimes. Being a Gen Xer and growing up with boomer parents, and actually my father was what they called the builder generation because of when he was born. Empathy was not something shared a lot amongst these generations. But we need to have empathy and we need to be able to relate to the other people we're working with. And sometimes we need to have that perspective of looking and seeing things from their perspective and understanding why they are reacting the way they are reacting to a situation. We need to be able to have that. If we want to lead them, we need to be able to understand them. Now, empathy doesn't mean agreements. It means connection. Empathy has helped me lead other people because, I can remember a friend who was really struggling, who wanted to quit what they were doing. And so instead of like, oh, you can't do that. I'm sorry, you can't. Now, sometimes tough love is great and we need to be the truth, but we need to give them the truth with grace. And that's what I did. I talked to them through that situation, why they wanted to quit. Why do you want to give up on your passion here? What is stopping you? What is wanting you? What is about you is saying, I can't do this anymore. And after a long conversation, I began to understand their frustrations. They weren't getting anywhere. They weren't building the influence they needed. But I encouraged them to continue, to take their time, that it doesn't have to be a rush, but take the small steps they needed. And you know what, over time, I had breakfast with the person the other day, and he's stepping up in a major way, in a way that he's never done before. When he's sidelined himself for so long, and now he's finally saying, okay, I'm ready to do what I need to do here. And it's because of just understanding and empathizing from where the person was coming from and coaching him through that. Now, again, self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and finally, social skills. And this is about building networks, resolving conflict, and inspiring others. Now, I'm pretty decent at resolving conflict, and people tell me I'm decent in inspiring others. But one thing I have to work on here, and this is the area for me personally that I have to grow in my EQ. If I look at all of them, this is the lowest plank that I'm dealing with. And I know for me, this is a place where I have to work. I've identified this. My social networking skills are not great, but what am I doing? I'm working to overcome that, involving myself in social networking situations and working myself through that, It's something I have to do. To build influence, I need to be able to network socially. I need to build this social skill side of my own personal EQ. Social skill is the currency of influence. Let me say that again. Social skill is the currency of influence, especially when you're not in charge. Did you guys hear that? Especially when we're not in charge, we need to build our social skills, because that's how we influence others, is that connection and those social skills. So why does EQ matter more today than ever? Why does EQ matter more than 30 years ago, nearly 30 years ago when this article was published? Well, in today's remote first hybrid environments, when Gen Z meets baby boomer workplace, emotional intelligence is not optional. Okay, it's essential to make those connections we need among our generations. You know, each generation looks at each other. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because I could spend hours talking about generational stuff. Each generation blames the other. You know, like a boomer or a Gen Xer might look at a Gen Zer goes, well, they're always on their phone. They're always on social media. They're never in the room and engaged. As a Gen Zer might think that these people are just old fashioned. They don't know anything about what I'm doing here. You know, I'm influencing. I'm trying to build my influence here. Whereas someone like a boomer might not see that. So we have to understand the necessity of making the connections, of building our EQ, regardless of what generation we're from. If you're a boomer, if you're a Gen Xer like me, if you're a millennial, if you're a Gen Zer, or if you're an upcoming Gen Alpha who will be moving into the workplace before we know it. People want connection, not just direction. The boomers grew up in a world where you do what I say, not what I do. I can remember being told that as a child so many times. Do what I say, not what I do. But that's not going to fly anymore with Gen Z. Gen Z needs that connection. They need to understand, and they don't just want direction. We need to give them the why. Now, we cannot rely solely on authority anymore. But what you're doing is you're sticking yourself on the first level of leadership if all you're doing is living with authoritative leadership. It doesn't work anymore. We need to lead with empathy and lead with connection. And we need to understand finally that the reason we want to build our EQ is our influence doesn't come from shouting and demanding. Our EQ comes from connecting, having empathy, and listening. Our EQ, notice our EQ said a lot of self in there, but when you really turn it around, building an EQ is about understanding others and learning and being the willingness to work with others. When COVID hit, I discovered how important it was to have an EQ. So many of my colleagues were floundering because their EQ did not work well. They weren't prepared to live under that stressful environment. So many teenagers' EQs dropped because they weren't prepared to live in that kind of environment. I saw firsthand the impact that EQ can have on the way we influence. And unfortunately for me, it wasn't great for me either. So let's talk about action steps in these last couple minutes. Growing our EQ. We need to be able to grow it. So here's how you can grow your EQ this week and over the next couple weeks. Number one, track one emotional trigger that you have. Journal it. Write it down and how you responded to that trigger. Track it. Learn what that trigger is. And when you learn what that trigger is, when you feel that trigger, pause, take a breath before you react and begin setting a different kind of allow yourself to shift the tone that trigger may be causing in you. 3, practice empathy. Ask somebody in the room, what's something you wish your team understood about you? Ask them directly, what is something your team wish they understood about you? Grow your social skills. Connect with somebody new this week. Take the time to say hello, to learn about them, to ask them questions, to ask them how they're doing. Take the time to do that. And if you begin to apply these, and if you want help to apply these, you can go to I've developed a free resource guide on emotional intelligence. I call it the EQ Leadership Reflection Guide. Just go to powerlessleaderpodcast.com and look for this episode and download the free resource. There you can get show notes, you can get transcripts of this episode, you can get everything you need at powerlessleaderpodcast.com. So go to that, download it, and access that information there. My free resource just for you for listening. Download that guide. So, powerless leaders aren't really powerless. We're just playing a different game. EQ is how we win. So I encourage you guys as a wrap up, take the time to journal this week. Take the time to figure out what those triggers are in your life. pause, reflect, and begin working through, connect with other people, do these things. I also encourage you, hey, to share this episode with others and friends who lead without a title. Visit powerlessleaderpodcast.com and grab that EQ toolkit. Book a free 15-minute session with me to help you grow your leadership influence. Now, until next time, remember, your leadership isn't limited by your position. It's powered by your presence. Again, your leadership isn't limited by your position or your power. It's powered by your presence, your influence, and your emotional intelligence. All right, folks, you have a great day, great week. We'll see you again in 2 weeks for the next episode of the Powerless Leader Podcast.